Mel Gibson's historical epic turned Scottish warrior William Wallace into a globally recognized icon of the struggle for freedom. Audiences loved the film, but historians hated it. Names, dates, battles, costumes, and even basic facts were changed or invented for dramatic effect. But the director never hid the fact that his film was more fiction than truth. He stated this in numerous interviews prior to the release of Braveheart. Gibson did not try to be historically accurate. He sought to convey the spirit that Wallace embodied. Braveheart was a box office hit and won countless awards, but the true legacy of this film is its influence. The film restored the grandeur of the historical drama genre, not through sophistication or authenticity, but through Gibson's passion. It was not just a film about a rebellion, it was a reminder that freedom is not given freely and is worth fighting for. For even when medieval swords rust and the shouts of warriors fade away among the Scottish hills, one word will still echo through the centuries.
The story behind the film's creation is almost as unexpected as its success. When screenwriter Randall Wallace began making his first notes, he had no experience writing screenplays for films. He worked as a novelist and television writer. After his first trip to Scotland, he became fascinated with the legend of William Wallace. Standing in front of the Wallace Monument, he realized that he knew nothing about the man to whom it was dedicated. This moment sparked an idea that would eventually become Braveheart. Randall returned home and immersed himself in his work. When he finished the script, he immediately rushed to send it to agencies and studios. As usual, no one was interested at first, so he ended up in what the film industry calls the pile of rejected scripts, a stack of scripts that risk being forgotten forever. But by chance, Randall Wallace's work found its way to Mel Gibson's production company, Icon Productions, and Mel was deeply impressed by the story. He was intrigued not only by its emotional depth, but also by its potential for creating spectacular visual effects. This fortunate discovery prompted Gibson to contact Randall, and within a few months, planning for the shoot had begun. Despite all expectations, this unknown screenwriter's first attempt became an Oscar-winning masterpiece. This proves that sometimes the most powerful stories come from novice authors who bring their fresh vision to the table. Randall Wallace was about 44 to 45 years old when he started working on the script. So here's another motivation to start something new in life and not think that you're too old for this. Believe it or not, Mel Gibson wasn't the first choice for the lead role. Initially, William Wallace was to be played by our favorite chain-link fence-hopping action hero, Liam Neeson, but the studio behind the project was looking for a more famous actor. Gibson really wanted to make Braveheart, but had no desire to star in it. One day, Paramount Pictures executives announced that they were only willing to allocate funds if Gibson starred in the film. When Mel Gibson took on the role of William Wallace, he brought passion and intensity to the screen. However, he was too old for his character. At the time of filming, Gibson was almost 40 years old. According to most historians, the real William Wallace led the fight for Scottish independence when he was about 30 and was executed in 1305 when he was 35. This age difference, which, depending on the period depicted, could exceed 15 years, surprised some viewers who were familiar with Wallace's biography. In the film, William was portrayed as an experienced warrior and romantic hero. But in reality, William Wallace was a young, courageous leader whose rise to prominence occurred at an earlier age. Nevertheless, the emotional weight and dramatic talent that Gibson brought to the role caused many viewers to overlook such details. The main focus was on Wallace's bravery and self-sacrifice, rather than his birth certificate. Although not entirely historically accurate, this decision worked from a cinematic point of view. It helped turn Braveheart into a powerful epic that impressed audiences of different generations. Interestingly, the legendary nickname Braveheart did not actually belong to William Wallace. History tells us that this was the name given to Robert Bruce, the future King of Scotland, who appears in the film as a conflicted character. The real Robert Bruce earned this nickname thanks to his courageous battles. But Mel Gibson's outstanding performance and the film's huge success managed to rewrite public memory. The film's title became so iconic that it completely overshadowed historical accuracy, creating a new legend that is now stronger than the truth. The film is known for its battle scenes. Most of the extras were real soldiers from the Irish Army. The filming required disciplined people who could follow instructions and work long hours in armor. Who better for the job than professional military personnel? About 1,500 members of the Irish Armed Forces were hired to film the battle scenes. Everything turned out perfectly. Their actions were precise, and their discipline added a realism. Some of these soldiers played the roles of Englishmen and Scots on the same day. One of them joked that he died 3 times in the same battle scene. Another claimed to have recognized himself in 5 different places when he saw the final cut. During the filming of one of the intense battle scenes, Brendan Gleeson, who played the fiery, red-haired warrior Hamish, accidentally got hit in the face with a weapon and broke his nose. The pain was unbearable. But instead of calling for help, Brendan Gleeson stayed in character and finished the scene. His decision surprised even Mel Gibson. Later, the American-Australian praised Gleeson's endurance and dedication, calling it one of the bravest acts he had ever seen on a film set. Ironically, Hamish was supposed to be a rough and fearless character, and Gleeson's real injury only added to his credibility. Most viewers who watched this scene had no idea that the pain on screen was not fake. This moment showed how far the actors were willing to go to make the film unforgettable. Mel Gibson was not only an actor and director. He was also one of the most active participants in dangerous scenes. During an episode in which Wallace had to fight several opponents at once, one of the stuntmen miscalculated the timing and hit Mel on the head. Although the sword was designed to be safer than a real blade, it still caused damage. Gibson did not move, and blood began to seep through his hair. Chaos broke out on the set. Medics rushed to Gibson's aid. He regained consciousness but was disoriented. He was taken to the hospital, where doctors determined that he had suffered a concussion and needed stitches. The injury was so serious that filming was halted for 3 days while the actor recovered. Such delays in the filming schedule cost tens of thousands of dollars, so Gibson returned to the set with his head still bandaged. This incident changed the way the rest of the fight scenes were filmed. Everyone became more cautious. Stunt doubles were used more often. The choreography of the fights was adjusted to reduce the risk of similar accidents. Gibson was unhappy with these restrictions because he wanted everything to look as realistic as possible, but he understood the necessity of such measures. The injury also had a negative impact on Gibson's ability to direct. Even after several weeks, he still experienced headaches and dizziness. There were days when he could barely concentrate. His assistant shot some of the less important scenes while Gibson recovered. Despite these setbacks, he continued to work, determined not to let the accident derail the film. Looking back, Gibson admits that the injury was a wake-up call for him. He was so focused on making Braveheart as intense and realistic as possible that he stopped thinking about his own safety. During one intense battle scene, Mel Gibson almost ended up in the hospital for the second time. One horse strayed from its assigned trajectory and jumped toward Gibson. Mel managed to dodge at the last moment. The horse flew past him a few inches above his head. At another moment, a flying prop nearly hit the cameraman. With swords being swung, arrows flying, and chaos all around, it's a wonder that no one was seriously injured. Braveheart told the story of fearless warriors, but it also showed the courage of the film crew, who risked a lot. The battle scenes look as if the soldiers are using real weapons. Swords clang against chainmail, and bones crunch under the blows of hammers. But the unfortunate incident with Gibson made adjustments necessary. Almost all of the weapons were made of rubber and foam. Rubber weapons were a smart choice from a safety standpoint. With hundreds of extras attacking each other and swords swinging from side to side, real metal weapons would have turned the set into a small graveyard. Wallace's huge sword was practically a character in its own right, but Mel had a habit of going on set without it. This became so common that the crew began to keep track of the sword as closely as they did the cameras. Although Wallace never forgot his sword in real life, Mel's forgetfulness gave rise to some behind-the-scenes banter, which helped maintain a friendly working atmosphere. The first battle in the film captivates with its realism. When two armies rush at each other, the fight seems real. Swords clang, bodies fall. Blood literally splatters on the camera. But the most interesting thing was the way it was filmed. Usually, battle scenes are carefully planned, and every movement is determined in advance. Braveheart was different. Gibson wanted chaos. He wanted unpredictability. So he told the extras to fight as if they were really at war. Of course, the weapons were designed to be safer than real medieval swords, but they could still cause injuries. The actors wore protective gear under their costumes, although broken bones and bruises were still common. On some days, the medical tent was so crowded that it felt more like a real war than a movie set. Gibson was personally at the center of the action. He did not direct the filming from a safe distance. Mel wore the same armor, had the same weapons, and threw himself into battle along with everyone else. There were moments when he received blows that were not planned. One actor accidentally hit Gibson in the face. Instead of stopping the shoot, Mel wiped the blood away and continued working. The filming method was also original. Instead of shooting from a distance, where everything looked neat and organized, the cameras plunged into the crowd. They moved along with the soldiers. When the sword swings toward the camera and everything shakes, it's because the cameraman was actually in danger. John Toll later said that filming these scenes was like participating in a real battle. He is, by the way, the legendary cinematographer who filmed The Thin Red Line, The Last Samurai, Tropic Thunder, and many other famous films. A very talented director of photography. The sound design added another layer of realism. The sound team spent months making sure every moment felt real. They studied historical descriptions of medieval battles to understand what they might have sounded like. The result is a soundtrack that makes you feel like you're standing on that battlefield. It's not just the violence that makes the battle scene so powerful. It's also important how Gibson shows the cost of war. You see men afraid before the attack, friends dying next to each other, bodies scattered across the field after the battle, and survivors too exhausted to celebrate. These moments remind viewers that this people's freedom came at a terrible price. Paramount Pictures was concerned about how realistic the battles were. They feared that the blood and violence would repel viewers. Gibson refused to tone it down. He believed that embellishing war would be dishonest. He wanted viewers to understand what William Wallace and his men actually faced. The Battle of Stirling Bridge is perhaps the most famous scene in the film. Filming these scenes took weeks. Medical personnel were always on standby, as injuries were inevitable. Despite the exhaustion and pain, most of the extras said it was the most interesting work they had ever done. It seems that everyone understood that they were part of something grand. But an interesting detail is that an important element was missing from the Battle of Stirling Bridge. One would think that if the battle is named after the bridge, then the bridge itself would at least appear in the background, but not in Braveheart. In the famous Battle of Stirling Bridge, this structure did not exist at all. Instead of depicting Scottish rebels using a narrow bridge to lure the English into a trap, the director chose an open field and a dramatic attack. This was great for slow-motion shots and fierce fighting, but not so good for historical accuracy. Why wasn't the bridge shown? The actual location was too small for filming, and building a bridge was completely out of the project's budget. Some fans joked that the bridge must have been used in another film or required a lot of money. In any case, its absence is a great loss for history buffs. In reality, the Scots won the battle because the English had to cross a very narrow bridge in small groups. The Scots waited, and then, when the enemy was divided, they launched their attack. It was a brilliant strategy. However, in the film, Wallace won thanks to the clever use of spears and cavalry maneuvers. Mel Gibson with a blue face is one of the most recognizable symbols of Braveheart. But this paint caused serious problems. The makeup team created a special formula that stayed on the face for long hours of filming. The problem was that this mixture irritated the skin. After several hours of wearing it, the actors began to experience burning and itching. By the end of the shooting day, some of them had rashes and sores. Mel Gibson wore combat makeup more than anyone else. There were days when he wore it for 14 hours straight. He never complained publicly, but the makeup artist noticed how much it was hurting him. Between takes, they tried to give his skin a break by cleaning it as thoroughly as possible. Then, just before filming began, they quickly reapplied the makeup. This constant cycle of applying and removing makeup aggravated the irritation. Mel Gibson later admitted that if he had known how much trouble the paint would cause, he might have looked for alternatives. There was also a historical debate about whether such paint was actually used in Wallace's time. Some historians claimed that it was used by the Picts, who lived several centuries before Wallace. Gibson was aware of this, but decided to deviate from history for the sake of spectacle. He wanted something that would make Wallace and his men look formidable and otherworldly. The Scots also wear kilts in the film, which is another anachronism. Such clothing only became widespread in the 1700s. However, the image of warriors in kilts with blue faces rushing into battle became a defining visual element of the film. It is at the moment when William paints his face that he ceases to be a simple farmer and becomes a symbol of rebellion. This visual metaphor was so powerful that it justified all the discomfort it caused. Wallace's famous speech about freedom was almost entirely improvised. The script called for the main character to say a couple of inspiring phrases, but Mel felt that something was missing. Gibson decided to trust his intuition and, on the day of filming, told the crew that he wanted to try something new. He asked them to turn on the cameras and let him speak from the heart. The crew was amazed. No one expected Gibson to be able to say something so powerful. Mel did several takes, changing the words and intonations, but the main message remained the same. In the end, the version that made it into the film was mostly from the first improvised take. The speech worked because it sounded sincere. Gibson wasn't just saying the words. He conveyed the emotions of a leader who knew he was about to lead his people to their deaths. His voice broke at certain moments. His face reflected genuine pain. This authenticity touched the audience in a way that a polished, scripted speech could never have done. Historians note that the real William Wallace probably never gave such speeches, as there are no records of what he actually said before battles, or whether he said anything motivational at all. The battle scenes would have been impossible without horses. It took months of training and a team of experienced trainers to teach them to charge into battle. Despite the training, working with so many animals was dangerous. During one cavalry charge, 2 horses collided, throwing both riders from their saddles. One man broke his arm, the other suffered a concussion. Filming had to be stopped for the rest of the day while medics treated the injured. Mel Gibson visited both men in the hospital and made sure they were well cared for. Such incidents reminded everyone how dangerous this work was. One proud horse, just like William Wallace, refused to obey. The animal was supposed to fall dramatically during an intense battle scene. Everything was ready. The cameras started rolling, but the horse just stood there, as if it didn't understand what all the fuss was about. The director asked to shoot the scene again, but the horse refused again. Everyone tried to persuade it with treats and gentle nudges, but this 4-legged rebel simply refused to fall. The film crew burst out laughing. In the end, a mechanical horse had to be used for this scene. The stubborn horse became a minor legend on the set. In a film filled with battles and dramatic events, this simple moment reminded everyone that animals have personalities too. Braveheart may have been about defiance, but no one expected one of the film's quietest stars to embody that rebellious spirit so strongly. The love story between William Wallace and Murron is an important plotline. Their romance is sweet, innocent, and ultimately tragic. This relationship looks so good on screen thanks to the genuine chemistry between Mel Gibson and Catherine McCormick, the actress who played Murron. Catherine was relatively unknown when she was cast in the role. Gibson saw something special in her during the audition. She brought tenderness to Murron, but she didn't come across as a helpless girl. She was a strong woman who loved deeply and paid the ultimate price for that love. The wedding of Wallace and Murron is one of the most beautiful moments in the film. The scene is quiet and intimate. There is no music, only their voices reciting their vows. This simplicity makes the episode even more powerful. You feel the weight of the promises the newlyweds make to each other. Gibson and McCormick spent time together off-set to establish a connection between their characters. They went for walks and talked about their characters, discussing what life might have been like for Wallace and Murron if she had lived. These conversations helped them understand the depth of their love. When they acted together, this understanding manifested itself in small moments. Every gesture seemed sincere. One of the most brutal scenes is Murron's murder. Gibson wanted the audience to feel the full weight of her death. He knew that if people didn't care about Murron's fate, they wouldn't care about Wallace's revenge either. So he made sure that her death was difficult to watch. This pain was to be the driving force behind everything that happened next. The relationship between William and Murron also highlights the personal cost of war. Wallace loses the woman he loves because of his disobedience. Mel has some kind of fetish for roles where his characters' wives die. Gibson's heroes lost their loved ones in Mad Max, Lethal Weapon, and Braveheart. At some point, you stop asking why Mel Gibson is angry. You just ask how long his wife has left. Many scenes in the film take place in castles. Trim Castle in Ireland was one of the main filming locations. It was built at the end of the 12th century, so it existed during the time of William Wallace, which, in my opinion, adds symbolism to the film. The film crew used Trim Castle for many scenes that took place in English fortresses. By changing the camera angles and using different rooms, the producers managed to reduce costs. So you could say that this building played several roles. Another Irish castle, Dun Soli, was also used for some interior scenes. Although most of the film was shot in Ireland, the film crew also visited Scotland to film the landscapes that Wallace saw. These wide fields contrasted beautifully with the cramped interiors of the castle. But the Scottish weather was completely unpredictable. A scene could start in sunshine and end in pouring rain. The film crew learned to work quickly, shooting when conditions were favorable. Some of the most beautiful moments in the film came about because the cameramen took advantage of sudden breaks in the clouds. Many fictional elements were added to the film, but at the same time, some historical figures were removed. The prominent military leader Andrew Moray, who commanded the uprising in Scotland alongside Wallace, was completely removed from the film's plot, as if he had never existed. Moray was not just a secondary ally. He was Wallace's equal partner in leading the Scottish resistance. By removing Moray from the plot, the authors turned the film into a story about one hero. This decision gave Wallace all the glory and recognition, but it also deprived viewers of the opportunity to understand that medieval uprisings were the result of cooperation, joint leadership, and unity. But even this did not cause as much outrage as the Prima Nocte law. Allegedly, English lords had the right to claim a knight with a Scottish bride on her wedding day. This horrific practice accounts for much of the emotional tension in the film. But historians have found no reliable evidence that this law was ever applied anywhere in medieval Europe, let alone Scotland. The film used this fictional law as a powerful plot device to justify Wallace's rebellion and elicit sympathy from viewers. I must note that this plot element works quite well, and the viewer feels a connection with the characters. Among the many faces scarred by battle, one looked more realistic than any makeup could achieve. Actor Tommy Flanagan's scars, sustained years earlier in an attack in Glasgow, told their own story. These wounds, known as the Glasgow Smile, nearly cost him his life, but on screen they gave his warrior an unforgettable authenticity that no makeup artist could recreate. Flanagan himself claimed that the wounds were inflicted by street robbers. But usually, such marks on the body are not made just like that. Often, such a smile was made as a public demonstration, as if to say, "Here's who you messed with. Here's what disobedience can lead to," or "Here's the punishment for betrayal." Tommy does not reveal the real reasons for these scars, but it is good that he found the strength to move on and become a famous actor. The romance with Princess Isabella was entirely fictional for the film. In reality, Isabella was still a young girl when Wallace had already passed away. Since William Wallace was a respectable man, not a pervert from Epstein's list, such a romance with a very young princess was unlikely to have occurred. There were plenty of movie mistakes in the film. During one wide shot, in a battle scene, a small white car can be seen in the distance. Historians suggest that 13th century warriors did not drive such chariots. In any case, it became one of the funniest mistakes. The practice of banning films in various countries did not spare Braveheart. Due to violence, profanity, and some nudity, Malaysian censors did not allow the film to be released.
That's got to be in the Guinness Book of Records, the most bare asses on screen in one shot.
Some schools in the UK also did not recommend that students watch this film due to historical inaccuracies. In my opinion, this is one of the best methods for any promotional campaign. If you want to make something popular, ban it. Obviously, such bans only increased interest in Gibson's work. The film also sparked political debate in Scotland and England. Some people claimed that Braveheart incited anti-English sentiment. Others simply said that it was a film with more gore than substance. But thank God, Braveheart reached most countries and became a cultural phenomenon. The execution scene in the finale is one of the most brutal and emotional in cinema. Filming it was extremely difficult for everyone involved. Mel Gibson had to portray incredible pain while maintaining Wallace's rebellious spirit. He was tied to the torture device for hours between takes. The position was uncomfortable, and he suffered severe back pain that lasted for several weeks after filming ended. The emotional strain was even more difficult. Gibson had to achieve a level of suffering and determination that would seem real. Between takes, he remained in character, in a gloomy mental state. Actors later said that it was unpleasant to be around him during those days because he seemed possessed. Gibson did several takes of the final scream, each time pushing himself further. By the time the right shot was obtained, his voice had almost disappeared. That ragged, desperate scream you hear in the final version of the film is real. He screamed until he was hoarse to get the moment right. The technical execution of the scene also required careful planning. The special effects team designed the torture devices and figured out how to make them functional without causing Gibson any real harm. The makeup artist created wounds that looked gruesome. Every detail had to be perfect, as many shots were filmed in close-up. This scene depicts the moment when Wallace becomes a legend. His refusal to beg for mercy, his defiance in the face of death, and his final cry transform him from a historical figure into a symbol,